I've always loved being alone. Even as a kid, I was the one who'd wander off into the woods behind our house just to sit and listen. To the wind threading through the trees, to the chirping of distant birds, to the silence that felt almost alive. When I grew older and life got louder, work, bills, crowded cities, I promised myself that one day I'd find somewhere far away from it all. A place I could escape to even just for a little while. That's how I ended up at the cabin in the pines. It wasn't mine. It belonged to a coworker's uncle, a reclusive hunter who'd moved out of state and barely used it anymore. It's remote as hell, my coworker told me with a laugh. No cell service, no neighbors for miles. You'll either love it or lose your mind. I smiled. That was exactly what I wanted. The cabin was tucked deep in the woods of northern Montana, down a narrow dirt road that looked more like a forgotten animal trail. My old SUV groaned over every rut and dip as I drove deeper into the forest. By the time I arrived, the sun was already low, staining the treetops in gold and crimson. It was perfect. A one-story log structure with a wraparound porch, a stone chimney, and a tiny lake glittering just beyond the tree line. It smelled like pine and earth and wood smoke, a place frozen in time. There was no electricity, no Wi-Fi, no reception. Just a wood-burning stove, a kerosene lantern, and a battery-powered radio that looked like it belonged in the 1980s. I unpacked a week's worth of supplies, made a fire, and watched the stars bloom overhead like 1,000 silver wounds in the dark. It was the quietest night I'd had in years. The first 2 days passed in blissful solitude. I hiked, read, cooked simple meals, and watched deer drift silently through the trees. Time felt slower out there, every sound sharper, every sensation amplified. Even the wind felt heavier somehow, pressing against the cabin walls with a deep, constant sigh. It wasn't until the third night that I noticed something strange. I was outside, splitting firewood by the light of a lantern. When I heard it, a crack, sharp and sudden, somewhere beyond the tree line, I froze, axe halfway raised, and listened. Silence. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon, maybe even a bear. I went back to chopping, trying not to think about it. But a minute later, there it was again, closer this time. A sharp, deliberate snap of a branch. I turned toward the trees. The lantern's glow only reached so far, and beyond that was nothing but darkness, an endless living void. I stared into it for a long time, heart ticking a little faster than before. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded small out there, swallowed by the night. No answer. Only silence. I finished stacking the wood quickly and went back inside, bolting the door behind me. It was probably just an animal, I told myself again. But something about it felt off, too slow, too deliberate. Like whoever or whatever was out there wanted me to hear it. The next morning, I found footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, pressed into the damp soil near the back of the cabin. Human footprints, barefoot. They led out of the forest and stopped just a few feet from the porch before turning back the way they came. I stood there for a long time, staring down at them. The ground was cold and wet. No one in their right mind would be walking barefoot out here. And yet there they were. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some hiker had gotten lost. Maybe a hunter had been tracking game and passed by without realizing. But the tracks didn't look like someone just passing by. They looked like someone had walked right up to my cabin and watched. I didn't feel like reading that day, or hiking. I mostly just sat by the window, scanning the tree line for movement. I told myself I wasn't scared, but every creak of the wood and rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. That night, the knocking started. It was just after midnight when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door. Not loud, not frantic, just patient. I froze in bed, my breath caught in my throat. The cabin was pitch black save for the dying embers in the fireplace. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe a branch had fallen. Maybe it was an animal bumping the wood, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Knock, knock, knock. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could and reached for the hunting rifle that hung above the mantel. I wasn't much of a gun person, but the coworker's uncle had insisted I take it just in case. For the first time, I was grateful he had. I crept to the back door, heart hammering, and pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Whoever, or whatever, had been there was gone. I waited a long time before I dared to open the door. When I finally did, the night stared back at me, still black and empty. But there, in the dirt just a few feet from the steps, were more footprints. Bare. Human. Leading into the forest. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next 2 days were worse. The knocks came again the following night, and the night after that. Always around midnight. Always slow, deliberate, patient. Sometimes it was the door. Sometimes it was the walls. Once I swear I heard it tapping on the window glass. I started sleeping with the rifle beside me. I barricaded the doors, nailed shut the windows, and lit the lanterns every night. But no matter what I did, the knocks kept coming. And every morning the footprints were there, circling the cabin, weaving in and out of the trees. It was clear now. This wasn't random. Someone was watching me, studying me, playing with me. By the 6th night, I was a wreck. My hands shook when I lit the fire. My eyes darted to the windows every few seconds. I'd stopped eating, stopped going outside. I just sat there, rifle across my lap, waiting for the night to come, and when it did, everything changed. It started with the usual knocking. 3 soft taps on the door, then silence. A minute later, 3 more, this time on the wall. Then the window. Then the roof. It was everywhere now, circling, closing in. I spun around, gun trembling in my hands, trying to follow the sounds. My chest felt tight. My breath came in shallow bursts. "Who's there?" I shouted into the darkness. "What do you want?" Silence. Then from just beyond the door a voice let me in. It was a whisper, soft, almost childlike. But there was something wrong with it. Something hollow. Like the words were being mimicked rather than spoken. "Please, it's cold." Every hair on my body stood on end. I backed away from the door, gripping the rifle so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Go away," I screamed. "I'm armed." Silence again. Then, knock, knock, knock. I didn't sleep that night either. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving. I didn't care about the rest of the week. I didn't care about the peace or the solitude. Whatever was out there wasn't going to stop, and I wasn't going to stay and find out what it wanted. I packed everything as quickly as I could and loaded it into the SUV. But when I went to start the engine, nothing happened. The battery was dead. I popped the hood and froze. The cables were gone. Not loose, not damaged. Gone, cleanly cut and removed. Someone had been under my hood. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. That's when I heard it, and from somewhere deep in the wood, a laugh. Low, quiet, mocking. I turned toward the sound, rifle raised, but saw nothing. Only trees. Only shadows. It was then I realized the truth. Whoever this was, they didn't want to scare me away. They wanted me to stay. I don't remember much of the next few hours. It's all a blur. Panic, exhaustion, the slow crushing weight of dread. I remember boarding up the windows. I remember checking the doors over and over. I remember sitting by the fire with the rifle in my lap, waiting for nightfall like a condemned man waiting for his execution. And then, I remember the noise. It was different this time. Not a knock, not a voice, a scrape, metal against wood. Coming from the front door, I crept forward, every muscle in my body screaming to run. The sound stopped, then click. The doorknob turned once, twice, slowly, gently. Someone was trying to open it. I raised the rifle, aiming at the door, but my hands were shaking too hard to keep it steady. The knob turned again, and then silence. For almost a full minute, nothing happened. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, moving around the cabin. Closer, closer, until they stopped right outside the window beside me. I didn't dare look. For what felt like hours, I sat there in the dark, rifle pointed at the door, waiting for it to explode inward, but it never did. The footsteps eventually faded. The forest fell silent again. When the sun finally rose, I was still sitting there, numb, hollow, and trembling. I was rescued 2 days later. A park ranger found me wandering the road 2 miles from the cabin. I don't even remember leaving. He said I was delirious, dehydrated, and mumbling about someone in the woods. They towed my SUV back and found the cables neatly coiled in the driver's seat. No one else was there. The sheriff's department investigated, of course. They found the footprints, the cut battery cables, even handprints on the windows. But no suspects, no leads, nothing. Whoever had been out there vanished. It's been 5 years since that week in the Pines, and I still think about it almost every day. I still wake up in the middle of the night to phantom knocks on my bedroom wall. I still check my car before I drive. I still can't be alone in the woods. Sometimes when I'm out walking and I pass a tree line, I swear I see someone there, just out of sight. Standing barefoot among the shadows, watching, waiting. I've lived in a lot of apartments over the years, too many probably. Between jobs, relationships, and the rising cost of rent, I'd become something of a nomad by the time I turned 30. But in all those years, through all those addresses, none of them have left a scar on me like the building on Birch Avenue. I moved into Birch Avenue Apartments in the fall of 2019. It was nothing special. An aging brick building with 6 floors, creaky elevators and paper-thin walls. But the rent was cheap, the location was convenient, and after a brutal breakup and an even more brutal year, I just wanted somewhere quiet to start over. At first, it seemed like I'd found exactly that. My unit was on the 5th floor, apartment 5C, a small one-bedroom with a view of the street below. The neighbors were polite but distant. There was an elderly woman across the hall who fed the stray cats, a young couple upstairs who argued often, but never loud enough to complain about. And then there was him, the man in 4B. I didn't know his name. I never even saw him for the first 2 weeks. All I knew was that he lived directly beneath me. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps pacing in the middle of the night, or the faint sound of a TV through the floor. Nothing unusual, until the knocking started. It was subtle at first, a single knock, always late at night, always somewhere beneath me. I'd be reading in bed and thunk, one sharp rap against the floor. I'd pause, listen, and when nothing followed, I'd go back to what I was doing. But the knocks kept coming. Once a night, then twice, then more, always from below. Always around 2 or 3 a.m. It was weird, but I figured maybe he was doing repairs or had some sort of late-night routine. Then the notes started appearing. The first one was slipped under my door about 3 weeks after I moved in. Just a small piece of lined paper, handwritten in neat, careful print. "I can hear you walking." That was it. No signature. No explanation. I stared at it for a long time, more confused than anything else. I wasn't particularly loud. I didn't have parties or guests. I worked late and spent most nights quietly reading or watching TV. I crumpled the note and threw it away. 2 nights later, another one appeared. "Please stop pacing. It's keeping me up." I was starting to feel unsettled. I hadn't been pacing, not that night, not any night. But I brushed it off. Maybe he had me mixed up with someone else. Maybe he was just sensitive to noise. Then the 3rd note came, and that one chilled me to the bone. "I know when you sleep." I brought the notes to the building manager the next morning. She frowned, said she'd look into it, and that was about it. I didn't expect much. Birch Avenue wasn't exactly known for its stellar management. Still, the notes stopped after that. For about a week, then the knocking returned. Louder, more frequent. And this time it wasn't just from the floor. Sometimes it came from the walls. Sometimes from the pipes. Once I swear I heard it directly beneath my bed. I started losing sleep. My nerves were shot. Every sound made me jump. I considered moving again, but rent prices were brutal, and I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just weird, not dangerous. I was wrong. It was a Wednesday night when I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine. Not from outside. From inside my apartment. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. It was faint but unmistakable. Slow, steady breathing coming from somewhere near the foot of my bed. I lay there perfectly still, straining my ears, terrified to move, and then I heard it. A whisper. Awake? I bolted upright and scrambled for the lamp. The light flicked on, flooding the room, of course, and there was no one there. The room was empty. The door was locked. The window shut. I barely slept the rest of the night, every shadow on the wall twisting into something human. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was a dream. A half-awake hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But then I found the note. It was on my kitchen counter. Not under the door this time, but inside the apartment. Nice pajamas. I called the police. They searched the apartment top to bottom. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. No fingerprints except mine. One officer suggested maybe I'd left the door unlocked and someone had slipped in. Another gently hinted that maybe I'd written the note myself in my sleep. I knew neither was true. After they left, I installed a chain lock, a door bar, and 2 extra deadbolts. I pushed a dresser in front of the bedroom window and shoved a chair under the doorknob at night. I even bought a cheap motion-activated camera for the living room. For a while, things were quiet. A few knocks here and there, but no more notes. No more whispers. I started to relax, enough to almost convince myself that maybe, just maybe, it was over. Then I checked the footage. It was a Friday morning. I was scrolling through the night's recordings over breakfast when I saw it. 3:17 a.m., time-stamped and clear as day. A man standing in my living room. Tall, thin, wearing a plain gray hoodie. Face turned toward my bedroom door. He stood there for nearly 10 minutes without moving. Then slowly, silently, he walked to the kitchen counter and placed a piece of paper on it. The same piece of paper I'd found the next morning. I don't remember much after that. I called the police again, shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. They came, watched the footage, filed a report. But again, no signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. No leads. "Are you sure you locked the door?" one of them asked me. I didn't answer. I knew I had. I stopped sleeping after that. Every night I sat awake with the lights on, the camera feed open on my phone, the heaviest object I owned clutched in my hands. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt alive, and then one night, just after 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. A motion alert. I opened the feed. He was back. This time, he wasn't in the living room. He was standing directly outside my bedroom door. I stared at the screen, paralyzed, watching him just stand there, breathing, listening. At one point, he tilted his head as if hearing something only he could understand. Then he raised his hand and pressed it gently against the door, right where my head was resting on the other side. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, heart screaming in my chest, until he finally turned and walked out of frame. When I dared to check the apartment minutes later, he was gone. No sign of him. No sign of how he'd gotten in. Just another note on the floor. "I like when you're awake." I moved out 3 days later. I packed everything I could fit into my car and left the rest behind. The landlord tried to fight me on breaking the lease, but I didn't care. I would have burned the place down before spending another night there. The police never found him. The building manager claimed there was no record of anyone living in 4B. It had been vacant for months. The name on the mailbox didn't match any tenant on file. Even the key I'd seen him use to unlock the apartment door wasn't registered to the building. It was like he'd never existed. It's been nearly 5 years since I left Birch Avenue, but I still have nightmares about that place. I still wake up in the middle of the night certain that someone's standing on the other side of my bedroom door. I still check every lock twice and sometimes 3 times and before I can sleep. And sometimes when I'm half awake in the dead of night, I swear I hear it again. That soft, patient knocking, coming from somewhere below. I've always loved road trips. There's something about the open highway, the endless horizon, the hum of tires on asphalt, the sense that anything could be waiting at the next turn. That's always felt like freedom to me. So when my friend Sophie asked if I wanted to help her move cross-country from Chicago to Portland, I jumped at the chance. It was a 30-hour drive, give or take, and we planned to split it into 3 days, taking turns behind the wheel. But 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Sophie came down with a brutal flu. She was bedridden, feverish, barely able to sit up. We postponed once, but she couldn't wait any longer. She had a new job starting the following week, so I offered to do it alone. Just me, her car, and a highway that stretched across half the country. I wish I'd never made that offer. The first day went smoothly enough. I left Chicago at dawn, my playlist queued, snacks stocked, and a thermos of coffee riding shotgun. The plan was simple. Make it to Omaha before nightfall, crash at a cheap motel, then push on the next morning. I was somewhere past Des Moines when I first noticed the car. It was a beat-up white sedan, maybe a Toyota or a Nissan. Late 90s or early 2000s, nothing special. It was a few car lengths behind me in the right lane. Nothing unusual about that. But an hour later, it was still there. Same lane, same distance. Same speed, I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I slowed down. It slowed down, I sped up. It sped up. I told myself I was being paranoid. There were dozens of cars on that stretch of I-80. This one was probably just heading the same way. Still, something about it felt off, too precise, too deliberate. At one point, I pulled into a rest stop to stretch my legs. 5 minutes later, the white sedan pulled in too. It didn't park near me. It didn't even turn off its engine. It just idled there, maybe 50 feet away. I stared at it for a long time. When I got back on the road, so did it. By the time I crossed into Nebraska, the sun was setting and my nerves were fraying. The sedan had been behind me for nearly 5 hours. Sometimes it would hang back, sometimes it would drift closer, but it never left. Never passed, never exited. At a gas station outside Lincoln, I decided to test it. I pulled off the highway at the last second, cutting across 2 lanes to take the exit. If they were just going the same direction, they'd keep going. They didn't. The sedan swerved across traffic, narrowly missing a semi, and followed me down the ramp. That's when I knew. This wasn't a coincidence. They were following me. I tried to lose them. I took random turns, looped through neighborhoods, even doubled back toward the highway. But no matter where I went, the sedan stayed behind me. Always just far enough not to be obvious, always just close enough to remind me it was there. My hands were shaking on the wheel. My heart was a drum in my chest. I thought about calling the police, but I was in the middle of nowhere, and my phone signal was spotty at best. Finally, I pulled into a brightly lit diner near the interstate. There were other cars there, other people. Safety in numbers, I figured. I parked near the entrance and waited. The sedan cruised by once, slow and deliberate, its driver hidden behind tinted windows. Then it kept going down the road. I waited 20 minutes before leaving. When I got back on the highway, it was gone. For the rest of the night, I didn't see the sedan again. I made it to Omaha, checked into a cheap roadside motel, and tried to convince myself it was over. Maybe whoever it was had gotten bored. Maybe they'd just been heading to the same town. Maybe. And I desperately wanted to believe this. I'd imagined the whole thing. I was wrong. At 3:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel outside my window. I pulled back the curtain. The white sedan was parked across the street, engine off, headlights dark. Just sitting there watching. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I checked out, threw my bag into the passenger seat, and peeled out of the parking lot. I didn't even stop for breakfast. I just wanted to put as much distance between me and that car as possible. For most of the morning, the highway was empty. I started to relax. My grip on the wheel loosened. Maybe they'd lost track of me overnight. Maybe they'd finally given up. Then around 11 a.m., I glanced into my rearview mirror, and my stomach dropped. There it was. Same white sedan, same distance, same lane. It hadn't given up at all. It had just been waiting. The rest of the day was a blur of panic. I tried every trick I could think of. Random exits, sudden lane changes, pulling over on the shoulder. But nothing shook them. They followed me into gas stations. They followed me back onto the highway, always staying just close enough to remind me that I wasn't alone. By late afternoon, I was deep into western Nebraska, a stretch of empty road that cut through flat, endless plains. There were no towns for miles, no exits, no cars but mine, and theirs. That's when they started getting bolder. The sedan would surge forward until it was barely a car length behind me, then drop back again. It would drift into the next lane, hover alongside me for a few seconds, then fall behind. At one point, it swerved directly into my lane before jerking back at the last second. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. Whoever was in that car wasn't just following me. They were playing with me. As night fell, I made a decision I probably shouldn't have. I got off the highway. There was a sign for a small town about 10 miles ahead. I figured if I could get into a populated area, somewhere with people, with lights, with police, I might finally be able to end this. The sedan followed me off the exit. The 2-lane road wound through empty farmland, moonlight glinting off rusted silos and abandoned barns. My GPS said the town was still 6 miles away when I noticed something strange. The sedan's headlights had vanished. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. No lights. No engine, no car. Relief washed over me. Maybe they'd turned off. Maybe they'd finally given up. I even started to laugh. Shaky, exhausted laughter that bubbled out of me uncontrollably. That's when I saw the headlights. Not behind me. Ahead. The sedan was parked sideways across the road, blocking both lanes. I slammed on the brakes, tires screaming against asphalt. The car skidded to a stop just 50 feet from the sedan. My hands were slick with sweat. My heart was a thunderclap. The driver's door opened. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that concealed their face. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They just stood there in the middle of the road watching me. I threw the car into reverse and stomped on the gas. The tires squealed, the engine roared, and I spun the wheel, swerving into a dirt driveway that led to a darkened farmhouse. I didn't care where it went. I just needed to get away. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figure calmly walking back toward the sedan. Then the headlights reappeared. Then they started moving. The dirt road twisted and bucked beneath my tires as I tore down it, dust clouding the air behind me. I didn't know where it led, a house, a field, a dead end, and I didn't care. All I knew was that the sedan was behind me again, closer than ever. The road ended at a locked gate. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop just yards from the fence. Ahead of me was nothing but empty farmland and darkness. The sedan's engine roared behind me. I spun the wheel, trying to turn around, but it was too late. The headlights were on me now, blinding and hot. The sedan stopped just 20 feet away. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the driver's door opened again. This time they didn't walk. They ran. I didn't wait to see what they wanted. I threw the car into reverse, backed up as fast as I could, and scraped past the edge of the sedan, tearing through the weeds and brush to get back onto the road. Gravel spat from under my tires as I sped back toward the highway. They followed. Of course they followed. For the next 30 minutes we raced through the dark, me pushing Sophie's car as fast as it would go, them never more than a few car lengths behind. Every time I thought I was pulling ahead, their headlights would grow larger in the mirror again. Finally, mercifully, I saw the glow of the interstate lights in the distance. I swerved onto the on-ramp and gunned it, merging into traffic at nearly 90 miles an hour. The sedan followed me halfway up the ramp, then stopped. I watched its headlights shrink in the distance as I disappeared into the night. I didn't stop again until I was nearly 3 hours away, in a motel in Cheyenne. I parked under a security light, locked the doors 3 times, and stared out the window until the sun came up. The white sedan never appeared again. I filed a police report the next morning. I gave them the make and model, the license plate, every detail I could remember. The officer took notes, nodded grimly, and told me they'd look into it. 2 weeks later, they called me back. The plate I'd given them didn't exist. The car, according to every record they could find, had never been registered anywhere. It was like it had never existed at all. It's been 6 years since that trip, and I haven't driven more than 100 miles from home since. I take trains, I fly. I avoid highways whenever I can. But sometimes late at night when I'm on a dark stretch of road and I glance in the rearview mirror, I swear I still see them. A pair of headlights. Just far enough back to make me doubt myself. Just close enough to know they're still there, watching, waiting, following.